Right. So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for logging into this webinar organized by Polymed, uh, wherein uh, the discussions about hospital-acquired infections and prevention strategies around that. So, as nosocomial infections or hospital-acquired infections, uh, as we all know, they are newly acquired infections that are contracted during a hospital environment or during hospital stay. And a multitude of pathogens are responsible for causing hospital-acquired infections. One is that, especially in the critical care practice setting, the challenges are more extreme in the sense that you have very sick patients there with compromised immunity, and then very high-end antibiotics, etc., being used there. And then they can get transmitted from the healthcare worker, patient, instruments, indwelling devices, etc. So today we are very happy to have Dr. Shikha Panwar, who is an associate director and HOD at the Center of Critical Care at Sarvodaya Hospital, Faridabad, who is going to cover this topic for us. A brief introduction of her: she did her MBBS from Dr. Bala Saheb Ambedkar University at Aurangabad, and then went on to complete her MD in anesthesia from the Government Medical College, Aurangabad. After which she had done an Indian Diploma in Critical Care Medicine from BLK Hospital, Delhi. She has more than 15 years of professional experience in critical care medicine, and she has been in the past chief of the critical care in Paras Hospital in Gurgaon, and before that, a senior consultant at senior consultant of the ICU at BLK Hospital, Delhi, and associate professor of anesthesia and critical care at GV Pant Hospital, Delhi. She has memberships with international organizations and Indian professional bodies like European Society of Critical Care Medicine, Indian Society of Critical Care Medicine, Indian Society of Anesthesiology. She has a very good publication in the Cardiac Journal of Anesthesia on pneumomediastinum after intubation. And her special areas of interest are around optimization of antibiotic uses in ICU. Probably she's going to talk about that in today's lecture. Mobilization of critically ill patient, nutrition and end of life care. Before we hand over the session to Dr. Shikha, may I also request all of you to please use the Q&A tab, which is appearing on your dashboards, whether using a mobile device or through your laptop. Please use that to post queries so that we can take it up towards the end of the session in the Q&A session. And if you have any comments regarding the technology, or whether it's audible or not, if there is any comments that you would want to post, please use the comments, please post your comments through the chat box option. So with that, let me, hand over the session to Dr. Shikha.
Very good afternoon to everyone. Thanks, Dr. Arijit, for such a wonderful introduction of mine. And the whole thing revolves around good patient care. So today we will be talking regarding, one of the most important issues in healthcare setting, and which is the hospital-acquired infection. So we all know that these are not new things to us, and we keep on getting such issues in our daily practice, hospital-acquired infection. So we will be learning how we can avoid these issues. So I'm just trying to share my screen with you all so that we can see my PowerPoints. Just give me a minute. So. So I'm just give me a minute. So I'm just trying to get to my PowerPoints. I think we are getting some issue here, Mr. Dr. Arijit. Can you sort it out in the screen sharing?
All right, ma'am. What's the issue?
I'm not able to share the screen.
Ma'am, just go to a share screen option and you can just share it.
I did that. I routinely share the screen. So.
No, sir, ma'am, just go to the share screen and you have to, there will be an option of share, in the
That is
left side.
I'm sharing the entire screen. I'm sharing that. I'm saying share, so but it's not getting it.
Is there a pop-out message, ma'am, after you do that?
Oh, I think I have to start video. Maybe that's the issue.
Yeah, maybe.
I'm so sorry for this issue.
Alternately, if you have the PPT, ma'am, you can just quickly email it to us. We can,
Yes, I'll do
make the
that.
slides
Just a
for
minute.
you. Yeah,
Come, give me 1 minute.
sure.
Yes, meanwhile, I'm sending the PowerPoints to you. Meanwhile, I just start with the audience. So, a very good afternoon to all of you. And I'm very sorry for this small glitch which has happened here. I'm not able to share my screen due to some issue. So, we will be talking about hospital-acquired infections today. So, there are a number of infections which you can acquire in the hospital, and we'll be discussing all those. So, amongst them, I will be covering the most important ones, which are COTI, CLABSI, ventilator-associated pneumonia, surgical site infections. So all those infections will be getting covered in today's topic. So to start with, as we all are aware that hospital-acquired infections are a major problem to most of the hospitals, and not only in India, it is a global problem. It's a global issue. So to tackle that issue, there are various societies around the world which are setting various guidelines. So various bundles are made, and various guidelines are made, and infection control practices are set in place so that we can control.
Yeah, excuse me, ma'am. Ma'am, really sorry. Your voice is really cracking right now. Few people are just sending message. Excuse me.
Hello.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Now it's fine, ma'am.
It's happening again, ma'am.
Yes, I have already sent you the.
It's happening again. The audio is cracking. Ma'am, if you have a headphone or something, ma'am, that you may try as an alternative.
No, I don't have any headphone.
Okay. Okay. All right, ma'am. We'll go ahead. Ma'am, yes, your screen is
So
getting
are you
shared.
able to ask?
Yes,
Are you
yes,
able to see my screen?
Yes, yes,
yes,
ma'am.
yes,
Yes.
It's
yes.
visible. Yes, ma'am.
Finally, we have been able to work on this glitch. So we'll be talking about hospital-acquired infection. Sorry for the glitch, and let's start. So as we all are aware of about hospital-acquired infections, so we'll be seeing how we can control these issues. So what is a hospital-acquired infection or a nosocomial infection? See, any infection which is acquired in a hospital by a patient who was admitted for a reason other than infection. Suppose a patient comes to us that he has got he comes to us for a surgery and we operate the patient. But after 3 days, the patient starts running a high-grade fever. And then it's like we find out that yes, the patient is developing a bloodstream infection. So this is the kind of infection which will be labeled as a hospital-acquired infection. So apart from that, I've already told you that it can be COTY, it can be VAP. So we'll be discussing all of this. So why are we so much worried about it? So let's see the epidemiology and let us see the impact of these infections. So coming to the epidemiology, according to the WHO, approximately 15% of all hospitalized patients they suffer from these infections. So, if you can understand the impact that if every fifth patient which comes to an hospital, he's having a risk of getting hospital-acquired infection. So obviously the incidence is very high in high-income countries. It is between 3.5 to 12%. Whereas if you come to the low-income countries, it is really much more higher than that. According to various studies, it is estimated to go up to 19 to 20%. So since we are again medium to a low income group, we will fall in that. The incidence of hospital acquired infection is quite high in us. So as you can see here, this is the impact, the total impact, how much impact hospital acquired infections can have on the patient and how many patients actually deaths can occur because of the hospital acquired infection. See, once a patient enters the hospital, as you can see, every fifth patient has a chance of getting a hospital acquired infection. So the number of people, this is cartoon which has been taken from American site. So the risk they have is 1.7 million people. They generally get infected by hospital acquired infections. They did not sign for this. They did not come for this, but they get this infection. So the total burden which comes on the economy is around 35 billion per year. So this is a huge amount. So this is one which has, these are the things which has been captured, the data which has been captured. And the amount of deaths which can occur is like more than 98,000. And if you can wonder, if a patient comes from a small surgery of appendix and if he gets a hospital acquired infection, he has to spend like more than 17.6 days extra. So this is the total burden of hospital acquired infection. So I think this is a major one and we need to do something to stop it. So let us see what happens and why the patient gets this kind of infection and what all we can do to stop this infection. So coming to the pathogens, see, this kind of infection can be caused by a bacteria, a virus, a fungus. It depends upon the environment in which the patient is there. So we'll be seeing that. But as we all know that the commonest organism is E. coli, then Staph aureus, Streptococcus. So these all are bacteria. So if you see, we are a predominantly gram-negative country. And we generally don't have a problem of MRSA as much as we have a problem of like E. coli and Pseudomonas and Klebsiella and Enterobacter. So Staph aureus and Streptococcus is more common, definitely not in our country, but it is more common in European and in American nations. But yes, if it is a skin and soft tissue, then definitely we'll be worried about gram-positive. But then rarely we do have problem of Candida also. Then we have problem of Serratia and other pathogens also. So where do all these infections come from? Let us see. So what are the factors? See, there are various factors. It can be the host factor. It is not always that hospital is at fault. It can be the host factor. If suppose your patient is an immunosuppressed patient, he is staying in an intensive care unit for a long time, and we are exposing the patient for prolonged use of antibiotics. So all these are the host factor because of the host itself is weak. So these, if the host is weak, then definitely he's at higher risk of getting infections from the environment and from the hospital. Then comes the environment. If the poor hygiene standard is there, Inadequate waste disposal is there. The healthcare workers are not taking poor precautions. The environment is contaminated. That is the second factor. Third is the unawareness. See, the people are not educated. The healthcare workers, if they're not educated properly, how to take the basic precautions, the injection techniques, use of proper devices, how to take care of them. These are the major factors which lead to these nosocomial infections. So coming to the patient factor, sometimes what happens, microflora of the patient, like suppose if what we have seen in many of the cancer patients or bone marrow transplant patients who are immunocompromised, they start developing, certain infections like which are completely drug resistant, Klebsiella, E. coli, and then later on we realize that this is what is happening, that the patient is getting infection is getting translocated from the gut only. So the colonization from the patient's normal flora is occurring, from the wound, from his nasopharynx, because the immunity is down and these infections then take control. So these are the issues which occur. Then coming to the hospital staff, yes, patient factors are there, but hospital staff factor is also there. So we have to take care of these things. If your hospital staff is having like lots of infections, we are not following proper hand hygiene measure. We are not taking care of the devices. We are having central lines, we are using them and the lines are dirty. We are not taking aseptic precautions. We can be spreading infection. So this is the second thing, we have to take care of the hospital staff. Last but not the least, the environment. See, it is always said that if the hospital is dirty, the environment is dirty, the patients will go more in sepsis. They will have more, they'll acquire more and more infections. So how to prevent it? Now the problem is that yes, we have nosocomial infections. So now what we have to do? Can we control them? How to prevent them? So basically, as always it has been said, the prevention is the key, because it is a significant cause of illness and death. So we have to take all the measures which we can take to prevent the spread of this infection. So let us see what measures, what preventive measures we can take so that we can control this infection. First of all, the environment. See, we have to take care of everything, all the thing of the environment, which what we can do. Unhygienic environment, it is one of the very good source for the pathogenic organism to prevail. So we have to keep the environment clean. We'll be seeing how to do that. Then air, water, food, everything can get contaminated and it can transmit to the patient under healthcare delivery. So there should be fixed policies that yes, this is an air exchange policy. If the patient is in ICU, we are going to have 10 to 12 air exchange. If it's in ICU, we have to clean the mopping of the floor has to be done every 2 hourly. If it is like the windows surface cleaning have to be done. So all these things have to be taken care of. So once you are able to take care of these things, definitely you are making the environment cleaner. So for the food also, so many times what we see that, patient is getting outbreak of infection occurs because of the food. So the food has to be prepared in a very good sterile environment. So all these things are there which need to be taken into account. So when we are doing, trying to prevent the hospital-acquired infection. So transmission from the staff, as I have already mentioned, that it is the duty of the healthcare professionals to take control of the infection control, and personal hygiene is necessary for everyone. So staff should maintain it. So hand contamination, hand hygiene is really one of the most important thing which needs to be done. And proper 5 moments of hand hygiene. My 5 moments of hand hygiene should be really followed. Before you touch the patient, after you touch the patient, after you have done any dirty procedure, once you are touching the surrounding of the patient. So all these measures have to be taken care of. And proper hand washing technique and sterilization of the hand technique should be done. I think if nothing, COVID has at least taught us how to clean our hands properly. So I think everyone is aware of proper hand hygiene measures. So these are the things which we can avoid. Transmission of infection from the staff can be stopped. Then use of masks, gloves, head covers, or a proper uniform. It is also essential for healthcare delivery. Now coming to the types of nosocomial infection, as I already stressed upon, these are the infections which we'll be dealing. Central line associated bloodstream infection, catheter associated urinary tract infections, surgical site infections, and ventilator associated pneumonia or HAP, hospital acquired pneumonia. So coming to the incidence, as you can see, the commonest is the urinary tract infection. So a COTI, it forms around 40% of the whole chunk of hospital-acquired infections. And if you believe me, if we do proper practices, it is actually very easy for us to go to a zero COTI rate. So we will see how we can approach to a zero COTI rate. Then comes the surgical site infection. Again, it is a very important this thing. 20% is surgical site infection. Comes the lower respiratory tract infections, then bacteria transmitted via IV catheterization, cutaneous infections, and some small other things. So we will be stressing upon how we can prevent COTI, how we can treat VAP. So we'll be seeing that. So coming to the VAPs, why I have taken ventilator-associated pneumonia as the first infection? Because this is the commonest infection which occurs in ICU, and this is the commonest healthcare-associated infection, or maybe ventilator-associated device-associated infection. So when we have a ventilator-associated pneumonia, what is the definition of VAP? Once we put the patient on the ventilator, if the patient is developing pneumonia after 48 hours, after being intubated and starting of mechanical ventilation, it is known as VAP. So now we all know the definition of VAP. But this infection should not be harboring inside the patient. Suppose if now in COVID era, we know that the incubation period is 14 days. Suppose we have a patient with us and he starts showing infiltrate symptoms COVID positive on the 3rd day. So definitely that is not a VAP. We know that this is infection which this patient was harboring inside him. So patient should not be harboring that infection inside him at the time of admission. So apart from that, it can be an early onset VAP, it can be a late onset VAP. So that all is VAP class. I will not go in details in that. But what are the causes? Why should a patient develop pneumonia when the patient is on ventilator? So let us see that. As you can see, these are all the secretions of the patient itself. They get, if the patient gets contaminated by them only. So I've already told you that this is the commonest infection in the ICU, and this is the second most or third most common infection in the hospital. Coming to the Indian data, so we whenever we present the data in our infection control committee or HICC NEAT, so we always try to find as much as a large number of VAP. Actually, what has happened recently to diagnose VAP or HAP in ICU is becoming more and more difficult because many criteria are there, and those criteria need to be fulfilled before you diagnose the VAP. And you know why this has happened? So many criteria have been developed because the burden of VAP was so high that American insurance companies have refused to pay for the VAP. So they have developed these stringent criteria, and there only it started that so much of economic burden comes because of VAP. So let us see all those data and let us see how it is infecting. It is how we can prevent the VAP. So if you see the Indian data, these are the various studies which I could find. And this is a study which is published in 2003. This was a 1-year trial in surgical patients. So number of patients which they could find was 241. And in them, 53% of the patients they developed VAP. And the mortality was 47%. That means around 150 patients, they actually succumbed to VAP. If you see for the Rakshit et al., they did 51 patients, the incidence of VAP was 47% and mortality was 37%. So as you can see, once your patient develops VAP, you intubate a patient for simply some other problem, but the patient comes, he develops VAP and he succumbs to VAP. So why it happens like that ways? Why should it happen that the patient succumbs to VAP? What are the risk factors for developing VAP? Some are host-related factors. See, now this thing is very nicely recognized that the host, if the patient is an advanced age patient, the patient is having underlying medical conditions, like it's an immunocompromised patient. The patient is on certain medications, like he has been exposed to very higher antibiotics earlier. It's a case of CKD, coming inside and outside hospital. So the patient is unconscious. So these are all very important things, the risk factors for patient post-risk factors for development of VAP. Coming to the device related, so the endotracheal tube itself, see once the endotracheal tube is in situ, the oral care becomes difficult. So the secretions, the patient can aspirate, microaspiration of the secretions can occur, and the microorganisms from the mouth itself, they can get mobilized and they can cause a VAP. Then the presence of the various tubes, you put a tube in the nose, you put a tube in the mouth. So all these tubes, they block the natural orifices, and secretions from these orifices, they can lead to VAP again. Prolonged mechanical ventilation. Number of intubation. You are trying to extubate the patient, but you have to reintubate. Reintubation is associated with the increased mortality. So all these things are there which have to be really taken care of. So this is the device-related factors. Then the personal, the people who are looking after the patient, if they're not cleaning their hands proper, the hand hygiene measures are not properly followed, they're not, following the bundles. So these are the factors. These are the three important risk factors which lead to development of the VAC. So you can decrease the incidence of VAC in your unit by doing proper measures, by doing proper hand hygiene, by taking care of the patient. So prevention is the key, as I have been stressing again and again. To prevent hospital-acquired infection, we have to take stringent measures. So what is important now? So what is happening to prevent? It's such a major human cry that many societies around the world. There's SHIA is there, National Institute of Health is there, CDC is there, Infectious Disease Society of America is there, Asia Pacific Society, Joint Commission International. These are the various societies which are working in tandem so that we can prevent VAC. So what are they doing? So many care bundles have been developed. And what is a bundle? As you can see, a bundle is a compilation of various small activities, which when done together, they actually improve patient care. So if I practice one of them, it might actually not give me much benefit. But yes, if I practice all of them together and make a bundle, so they do actually help. So we will be seeing various bundles, COTI, CLABSI, and VAC bundles. So how to implement them? So for VAC, we have these bundles. So, the important thing is education of the nursing staff here, because they only have to implement the bundles. So these are the 5 important bundles for the VAC. Oral care, daily oral care of the patient with chlorhexidine is one of the important parts. Head and elevation, 25 to 45 degrees. Stress ulcer prophylaxis, again very important, because this only will prevent the translocation of acid into the influx into the lungs. And daily sedation assessment and spontaneous breathing trial. And last but not least, venous thrombosis prophylaxis. So all of these things are done together. So in my unit, we do sedation, sedation every day. Hello.
Sorry for the interruption, ma'am. Your voice is cracking once more.
Okay.
So the alternative would be, maybe if you can go a bit slower, that may rectify the issue. Maybe when you deliver the talk slightly slower, probably we may be able to do this cracking thing.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. So coming to the bundles, this is the 5 bundles of the VAC, which we will be seeing. In my unit, we apply them every day. So we have a checklist. So let us see the checklist. This is the VAC prevention checklist. So as you can see here, there is a DVT prophylaxis, whether the patient is taking the DVT prophylaxis or not. So either it can be enoxaparin or it can be the presence of the DVT pump. So every day there has to be signed yes or no, or maybe this is not applicable to the patient. Head end of the bed is elevated at least 30 degrees or not. Then peptic ulcer disease prophylaxis is the patient getting? If no, why? Then discussion of the readiness to extubate and wean. So every day morning we give a sedation holiday, or else I will say one thing, that we are not giving deep sedation to any of our patients. Gone are the days when deep sedation was used. So now what we do is we use very mild sedation, and we keep our Ramsay sedation score really, that the patient is awake. So whenever we tap the patient, he should be in an awake state. So we don't give deep sedation, and we try to reduce the sedation as much as possible according to the condition of the patient. And last but not the least, oral care and the hygiene. So these are important VAC prevention checklists. And these all checklists should be a part of the file, and compliance is very important. We really need to check the compliance, that the staff is compliant with this or not. So what again, it's the same thing. Education is very important. You have to educate your staff daily, and you have to actually take care that it is followed, because making a checklist, keeping it in the file will not serve a purpose. Education of the staff is really important here. So once you make the bundles, everyone should be aware of the bundles, and we have to tell them, we have to teach them that yes, the importance of the bundles is that we are going to prevent the mortality by avoiding VAP. So this was regarding VAP. Coming to the catheter-related bloodstream infection, CLABSI. So what is CLABSI? So see, in ICUs and in our wards, we are routinely putting central line. So central line associated bloodstream infection is known by CLABSI. It refers to the primary bloodstream infection in a patient. Again, after 48 hours, once you have put the line, if the patient develops a bloodstream infection, it is known as CLABSI. See, now this is very important that we should know how to identify CLABSI and how to diagnose CLABSI. So I'll talk about that later, how to send the blood cultures. So central line associated, again, they are deadly infections. If a patient gets the infection by central line, the chances of death is around 12 to 25%, because see, it is directly going into the bloodstream. So, and the patient is already, maybe if the patient is on central line, generally he is on multiple vasopressors and he needs multiple medications. So we have to, again, the same thing is we have to prevent the onset of CLABSI. So how can we prevent the onset of CLABSI? By applying bundles. So now see, in America, from 2008 to 2013. So what they did, they started educating the healthcare workers regarding CLABSI. So what did they achieve? It's not that it is not achievable, it is achievable. There was a decrease of 46% in CLABSI from in these 5 years, and estimated, but still, despite 46% decrease, the number of incidents of CLABSI is still more than 30,000. So you can estimate, you can just get an idea how big this problem is. So why should a patient actually get infection from a central line? What is wrong we are doing? One thing is that, see, if we are using a contaminated infusate, we are not taking care of these hubs, okay, and the hub is contaminated with something, and we are not scrubbing the hub and just giving the drug inside. From the skin, if we are not taking care of this insertion site, so these are certain things, or maybe we are putting the line itself is dirty, okay, and the fibrin sheet formation can occur here. So this is a pathology. These are the reasons why a patient may get, the line may get infected. And then this is the hematogenous spread from the vein. The patient get, maybe this is a central infection. This is not CLABSI, but this is a hematogenous spread. Maybe the patient is having pneumonia and then the patient is having some infection. So coming to the risk factors. So again, as I already told you, there are patient, host, and environment risk factor. Host is, again, he's an immunocompromised patient is there. Okay, and maybe we are not able to sometimes insert the line in the neckline in the desired location. We have to take femoral access. So because this is a host factor. And again, prolonged hospital stay, the staff hand hygiene measures, not taking full aseptic precautions, not using PP. These are all very high risk factors. So coming to the central venous catheter care bundles. Now here I will stress upon few things. See, you have to have insertions. Right from the point when we are inserting a catheter, this is the step 0. So you have to, first of all, you should discuss whether the patient needs a central line or the patient can work well with a peripheral line. If it is not possible to avoid a catheter, then you have to insert a catheter. But to insert the catheter also, you have to have a full aseptic precaution. Here only we have an insertion checklist. So when you are inserting a catheter, it has to be proper aseptic technique has to be taken, and then we have a maintenance checklist, and then we have the thing which is known as the removal. That for every day you have to see whether we can remove the catheter or not. So this is how we can take the care of the central line catheters. So coming to the insertion checklist. So here what we have to do, education of the healthcare personnel inserting and maintaining central lines, which is very important. See, so many times we think we know everything about process, but it's not like that. Repeatedly, training the staff regarding the personal hygiene, regarding the hand hygiene measures, regarding the proper draping of the patient. And these things actually go a long way. So same thing, hand hygiene, proper hand wash, maximum sterile barrier precautions. A study done in America, it find out that if we are doing full patient draping, we are able to decrease the number of central line associated bloodstream infection. So we should do proper sterile measures should be used. Coming to maintenance bundles. sites, again, before insertion, again, this is very important, which site. See now, before inserting, which site should be chosen. Generally, femoral has to be avoided in adults. And in children, we can choose femoral because that's one of the best site because the neck is very short. And in adults also, we have the best side, it is said, is subclavian, but femoral subclavian, but generally jugular is chosen because it is a site where we can actually do good compression. But if I have a good choice and if the PT-INR of the patient is good, please go for a subclavian because this is a site which is very easy to maintain. Optimum site preparation. Again, before insertion, prepare the site with chlorhexidine skin solutions. And then again, the number of lumens. Don't unnecessarily put a triple lumen all the time. If you can have a single lumen or dual lumen, and the patient doesn't require more than that, do that. So coming to the maintenance bundles. So now once you have inserted the device under complete aseptic precaution, you have to go for the maintenance bundle. So once you want to access a CBC, you should do this only with sterile devices. Okay, and you should always use aseptic techniques. Scrub the hub. This is very important. Anytime you want to use the hub, you should clean it for at least minimum 5 seconds and you should let it dry. Then you should assess patency of the lines by flushing and aspirating blood. See, I don't want to see blood at any point when my central line is there. Blood should not be present in the central line lumens. Blood should not be there in your connectors. So always you should keep your lines clean. And dressing is very important. I will talk about dressing also. And you have to maintain a closed system as much as possible. And you should avoid disconnecting the central line as much as you can. Coming to the infusion, how you should infuse, and we always know that you have to replace an administration set. If you're using a transfusion set, you can replace it after every 96 hours and minimum not more than 7 days. No need to change them daily. So every 4th day, and you can change them from 4th to 7th day. And the tubings, but if you're using something like propofol, you have to change it every 6 to 12 hours. So propofol is something which will get contaminated very fast. So if you're using such infusions like propofol, you have to change the tubing. So we have also switched to needleless components. We don't want to puncture the sets at all. Go switch to needleless components. So this is the dressing part. So as you can see, this is how the dressing should look, central line dressing. It should be clearly visible. You should always use something which is you can see-through dressing should be used. And if you have a chlorhexidine patch in our practice in ICU, we use chlorhexidine patch. Blood should not be visible here. Blood should not be visible here at any point of time. So this is how we keep the this thing. And when should you change the dressing? If you are using a gauze, you should change it every 2nd day. If it is a transparent dressing, we can change it every 7th day. And what if the dressing becomes loose or dampened, then please change it. And see, as you can see, you should write the name and date and time that when your dressing change is due, which is very important. So now, as discussed, if you are taking care of a central line, hand hygiene is very important. Always scrub the hub. When you are inserting, use PPE and follow very highly all aseptic techniques which you can. And proper training of the staff regarding handling of central line catheters is very important. Now coming to how to diagnose bloodstream infection. See, generally what we do is we send always double-side blood cultures, and if both the cultures come positive for a particular bug, then it is a bloodstream infection, and it can be a line-associated infection also. And only if the line itself comes contaminated and the peripheral is clean, that we are sure that the line is contaminated. So we directly change the site of the line. So we avoid changing of the line over a guide wire. We don't do that practice anymore. So if you have proper site, change the site. Never change the line over a guide wire because it is not going to do any benefit to any of us. Coming to the most commonest hospital-acquired infection, which is known as SCOTY. It is the urinary tract infection. Again, when the infections occur within 48 hours of insertion of a urinary catheter, it is known as SCOTY. So now see, it is possible to have a zero rate. This is what most of the hospitals they aspire for, a zero COTI rate. But globally, we know COTI is a very notorious infection, and it has like more than 12% of reported infections. So it is generally caused by endogenous and native microflora of the patient. And it itself can lead to lots of complications like orchitis, epididymitis, prostatitis in male, pyelonephritis, cystitis, and even meningitis in patients. So really, it is a major nuisance. So we should do everything what we can do to prevent COTI. So what are the risk factors? Prolonged catheterization. Suppose we had a female patient who was in ICU for 60 days. So actually, she did get COTI despite all the measures what we take. So these are certain things which are, which will make your patient more prone to get infection. Unsterile procedure. You don't know how to take proper aseptic technique, and single-handedly you want to put a catheter. Definitely, you're inviting trouble. Host factors are there, and sampling techniques are there. So coming to no COTI, we want zero COTI, or we want to completely decrease the incidence of COTI in our unit. What we have to do? Again, we have to follow the bundles. So coming for this is the mnemonic you can learn. Need for catheter assist. Whether you need, whether the patient requires a catheter. This is the most important thing which we have to ask. And if yes, please document the reason. And again, obtain patient consent and inform. Offer patient the education. Coming to the competency, anybody who's inserting the catheter should be properly trained. It should be inserted until complete aseptic techniques. And whenever you are having a catheter and a urometer, a bag is there, you should always ensure there is no kink, no loop, and the catheter is secured below the bag, below the bladder level and off the floor. It should not be touching the floor. So all these are things which we can do to prevent COTI. Timely catheter removal and infection risk. Collect urine specimen only when clinically indicated. So these are certain things which we can do to prevent COTI. Because once we have infection, then again the cascade starts and we may lose our patient because of COTI. Coming to the surgical site infection. Now SSI, they are nosocomial infections. They fall in 2 to 5% of the patients subjected to surgery. So let us see what bundles we can see to prevent this. Again, there are plenty of bundles for same. Preoperative bathing and showering is very important. Surgical antibiotic prophylaxis, only the patients who require antibiotic prophylaxis should be given. Unnecessary bombarding a patient with antibiotic is not indicated. Hair removal at the time of doing surgery only, not before that. Skin antiseptic preparation, surgical hand scrub preparation, all these are the bundles which we can apply for surgical site infection. Coming to the control of nosocomial infections, how we can control. So these were the measures in which we understood that we can prevent. Okay, so now we have discussed COTI, we have discussed CLABSI, we have discussed VAP, and we have discussed SSI. So these are the things which can be done to control specific infections. But apart from that, when a patient is in hospital, we have to control the movement of the all the healthcare workers, and we have to educate them as whole, because there are a multitude of other problems and infections which can occur. So to do that, what should a hospital be doing, and what are the things which we can do? So we will be discussing those points now. So we should have infection control program, we should have antibiotic control program, and we should have surveillance program. So this thing is very important, surveillance. See, you have to measure everything. If we do not measure, we will never come to know. So we should be aware of the rate, how much rate of hospital-acquired infection is there in my unit. Then only you will work towards controlling it. So coming to the infection control programs. So all the healthcare institutes, they should have control programs against these infections. There should be a committee. So we have a hospital HICC, Hospital Infection Control Committee in place. And the work of this committee is to overlook all the infections and to prevent them. And they have to see a smooth functioning and the implementation of all the bundles and all the healthcare practices. Hand hygiene audits have to be done by this committee. So let us see what is the role of this committee. So they have to make everyone aware regarding the standard precautions, hand hygiene, respiratory hygiene, use of proper personal protective equipment, injection safety, medication storage and handling, cleaning, transmission-based precaution, contact, droplet and airborne, proper immunization of the staff and vaccination, education and training of healthcare staff. So we should have such committee in place. Coming to the antibiotics, again, antibiotics and emerging antibiotic microbial resistance is a sore place for I think most of us, and we know that antibiotic misuse which occurs is really huge problem in our country. So because we know our patients, they go for self-medication with antibiotics, incorrect dose, prolonged use, lack of standard for healthcare workers, and misuse in animal husbandry. So these are all responsible for increase in the resistance. So this resistance, we know, the more our patient is exposed to multiple type of antibiotics, he will have more multiple type of resistant bugs. Pan-drug resistant bugs will be, the patient will have. So antibiotics will not work, whatever we give once the patient becomes critical. So this is a major issue, and we all are aware of these bugs. Methicillin resistant staph aureus, vancomycin resistant ESBL. So what we can do to stop this? So proper antibiotic, appropriate antibiotic should be used. We should always, according to the patient is coming from community. If he's having pneumonia, we should use antibiotics which should be used for CAP rather than directly putting a patient on very higher and broad spectrum antibiotics. We should adhere to simple BLBLIs like Augmentin, and we should always have antibiotic resistance awareness should be there. And all the physicians and all the healthcare workers who are working in a hospital, they should be knowing what is the resistance in their hospital, what is the microbiogram of their hospital. And we should have antibiotic control policy and antibiotic stewardship. So these all things we can do. Coming to the surveillance of nosocomial infection. See, again, the most important thing is that we should always measure. Measuring is most important. If I don't know how much big the problem is, I will never be able to control the problem. This is very important. We should have active surveillance. We should have targeted surveillance. For active, I mean to say that we need to identify the prevalence, that this is identify the infected patient, collect the data, incidence, attack rate, infection rate, incidence rate, site, unit oriented. If one unit is having high rate, just go and assess what is happening wrong in that unit. So appropriately timed investigator should be there, and all these things will lead to a better outcome. So coming to the last slide of take home, hospital-acquired infections definitely are a major concern, and they are a leading cause of death, as I already showed you, and they are a huge economic burden. So that means all healthcare workers, our environment, and a host factor, they are all responsible for the cause of hospital-acquired infections. So what we can do? We can take proper measures to curb this nuisance. By identification of the proper problem by proper surveillance, identify the problem first. Educate your healthcare workers regarding the problem. Implement all the care bundles. Implement a good antibiotic policy. And the infection control committee should be active and should be taking regular part. So with this, I will like to end my lecture. So back to the panelists.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Very comprehensive. I think the 200 plus audience now would have listened to you very intently and would have learned, but still